Hey everyone, it's Amanda Radke back for another episode of the Heart of Rural America podcast, the show where we highlight great people doing inspiring things in their rural communities to make agriculture stronger. As you know, I travel across the country and meet all kinds of amazing people that I love to highlight on this show. But today's guest I met on X, or formerly known as Twitter. He's kind of taken X by storm, kind of busting the lid open on a lot of the corruption happening in food and agriculture with our politicians. And you might have noticed kind of a common theme of this show that there is an attack on agriculture and on the family farm and ranch. And to me, it boils down to a few things, and primarily boils down to private property rights and our ability to own and manage our land and our livestock as we see fit. And what I hope that we uncover in this conversation today is there is a tangled web, and some of it doesn't or comes from unexpected places. So, Dustin Kittle, welcome to the show. I'm excited to dive into your story, what you've uncovered, and try to unpack this for the guests.
Thank you very much for having me, Amanda. Really appreciate it. And I followed your work on X and certainly love the work that you're doing as well.
Well, thank you. So, Dustin is a Tennessee rancher. He's a lawyer, and he's actually sued Joe Biden. Now, Dustin, we're going to get into that, but I have to remind the listeners he's not the first person I've interviewed on this show that's sued, gone to court against our lovely president. You guys might remember hearing about Chris and Cassie Keaton out in Arizona grazing on the Grand Canyon, Arizona Strip, and they're losing their grazing rights due to a national monument designation. And that's just one of 1,000 different cuts that farmers and ranchers are facing across the country. So, Dustin, let's hear about your story. What led you to go to court against, the highest officer in the land?
Yeah, absolutely. So to give you a little bit of background on myself, I grew up on a farm, cattle and poultry farm and horses, and was a state FFA officer. I know you were a member of FFA, and I've always had a passion for agriculture. I've always either lived on a farm or represented farms. Went to law school, and really the motivation behind going to law school for me was growing up, and my parents, neither one were attorneys. They had never went to college. And I saw the difficulty they had in being able to manage a family farm with all of the constraints of industry and with government. And beyond that, just within rural communities, I saw the struggle of people and the lack of available capable legal services for farmers and ranchers. And so it has always been a part of my practice. And the case related to President Biden actually goes 10 years back. In 2014, my law firm handled a case that involved a fraud that was within the USDA. And it had to do with funding that went out to rural broadband internet providers. And the case was, it ended up, we represented over 10,000 individuals in rural communities who had paid for a certain speed of internet that they weren't getting. And in the process, those internet providers had submitted to the USDA and let them know we can't hit certain speeds in these communities. So it was a self-proving case. And there were internet providers that got hundreds of millions of dollars. And what we exposed in that case was that we were severely lacking in oversight when it came to the USDA as far as protecting these rural communities. And instead, what we were doing was passing out money to these corporations. And so that happened 10 years ago. And then in 2021, we were representing a group of farm credit borrowers. I had a farm credit loan myself, and they decided that they would just come and take me out, I think, once and for all. And so we'd never missed a loan payment up here in Tennessee, just minding my own business, trying to help our clients. We represented a group of clients in Alabama who were poultry growers, and they happened to be borrowers at the Alabama Farm Credit Institution where I was, but we ultimately were threatened with foreclosure if we continued to maintain that there were violations of law. They wanted us to sign confidentiality. That we were extorted for a period of over 100 days. That's how long I could hold them off because that farm credit lender was colluding with the government, with the Farm Credit Administration, who should have been the oversight body to stop them. And ultimately, what ended up happening is while I had appealed to the federal government, and they should have had every incentive in the world to come in and keep me and all of their other borrowers from being subjected to those violations, they instead sat back and just watched us burn. And I sold my personal home. I sold my family's home, and I paid off our loans 20 years early.
Wow.
And I did that because I felt like these issues were so important as far as maintaining my right to free speech on it. And so for the last 3 years, it's been a fight leading up to that, to the point that last June, the Farm Credit Administration had to admit, after 657 days, the longest investigation in farm credit history, by the way, that they did violate laws related to me. They instead, though, they come back and said, you paid off your loan. You're no longer a borrower. You lack standing. Kind of the same issue as a case that came out recently with Missouri versus Biden. But you lack standing, so there's nothing we're going to do for you. And so our suit against President Biden was related to that. What we ultimately found out during our investigation is the top positions of Farm Credit, there's a 3-member board there.
Mm-hmm.
And that 3-member board right now has one functional individual serving on it who is serving in a legitimate term. The other 2 individuals have been serving in an expired term. And while my investigation was going on, when somebody from the federal government should have come to our rescue, during that period of time, there were only 2 members on the board. And if you look back, the responsibility for appointing that board goes to Joe Biden. And it simply was not done. And so, it's always funny when people find out you're suing the president. How crazy is this? It is as legitimate and straightforward of a case as I've ever had, and this is the first lawsuit I've ever filed in my own name, by the way.
Wow.
The situation is this. If you go back 50 years ago to Richard Nixon, he had failed to make certain political appointments, and he got sued. He claimed immunity, which is another issue that's related and in the news related to the Trump opinion that come out this week. The court ended up saying, no, a private citizen could sue the president, not over who they appointed to a position if they disagreed with it, but if the president failed to make that appointment. And Joe Biden went 3 years without making these appointments. I mean, we're almost to the end of his term, and there are 2 Farm Credit Board appointments that were never made. Wow. So that's a long way around the world of telling you how you sue the president of the United States.
So where are things as they sit today?
Yep. So we are still in, I guess here's the good news. The good news is case is pending. Our goal is for that case to just sit there as long as it can. We have filed an amended complaint adding additional allegations to it, but it is a writ of mandamus is the relief that we're seeking. And what a writ of mandamus is we're asking the court to tell the president, Joe Biden, you have to make these appointments. And I get some pushback from people like, why didn't you wait until the election happened this November to do that? The reality is there are people out there right now that stand to lose their farms over this. I've got clients that stand to lose their farms. And so I don't have the luxury of being able to wait. And I would also say this, and this is the most underreported executive branch story I've ever seen, but President Trump in 2019 appointed someone to the board. The individual's name was Rodney Brown. Farm Bureau and the Farm Credit Council stepped in and asked the Ag Committee not to approve him. And for 2 years, Mr. Brown never got a confirmation hearing. And that, in hindsight, it's amazing that we went 2 years with only a 2-member board because they wouldn't allow someone to even have a hearing.
Wow.
And so, when people say, well, wait till November, what happens in November if the Ag Committee stalls for 2 years? And so my whole goal is to bring all of these issues to a higher level. And there's no better way, I felt like, to do that than just to bring Joe Biden to the negotiation table.
I love it. I love it. And I mean, I hate that this has happened to you, but I'm thankful that you're willing to bring this discussion to the forefront. And I guess as I'm listening to you tell this story and talking about just kind of the political retaliation and just the extortion, and it puts producers in a really vulnerable position of, as we're seeing things coming down the pike from carbon emission metrics or ESG scores or all these little things that are coming from Green New Deal discussions or regulatory things coming down the pike. How close are we to that being the norm where producers are going to have to bend the knee to some of this stuff in order to keep their loans?
It's we're past that point, I would say. It's the inflection point to all of this, I think, happened between 2017 and 2022. And that is when you had really a 5-year stretch there where we lost more farms per capita than what we had ever lost in the nation's history. And conversely, with that, you saw the greatest increase in foreign holdings of American farmland during that period of time. And you back all the way up to you go all the way back to 1997, and the USDA and Farm Credit have essentially colluded since that time. They issued an interpretation of a rule that said Farm Credit, which is a government-sponsored enterprise of the United States, could lend to foreign agents. And how we could have ever, I know how that got pushed forward. It got pushed forward because lobbyists were willing to contribute enough money to politicians' campaigns to look the other way.
Yeah.
And that's the reality of it. We're in a position right now really to where between the government and between big ag, the Tysons of the world, the small farmers are being whittled away one at a time.
Mhm.
And it takes something. This is a message that has been hidden to some extent. You have people that have been on the forefront of this movement, like you, for example, and other individuals that have stepped up. But the norm at the producer level, there has been, until it's came to their particular doorstep, there's not a lot of knowledge out there as far as what has went on. And we have reached a point to where if something is not done, you can do the math on this. In 25 years, we are on pace to hang the last for sale sign on the last family farm in America. And that's just looking strictly at the math over the last 100 years. And more, when you see these regulations come out and everything else, you can see how that could happen.
hmm we're landing in the same space of what I think is happening in this country and just the carving out of the small and mid-sized family farm and ranch. And I think of that Reagan quote where he said, the scariest words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." And in modern day times, that looks like in South Dakota saying things like, "We believe in economic development and value added agriculture through private public partnerships." Well, that directly puts money into big corporations and squeezes out the little guy. And so, yeah, here in South Dakota, we're in a battle for our private property rights over a carbon sequestration pipeline that stands to make millions for a certain number of people, but it's wiping out miles, hundreds of miles of family farms in the process. And so when I say this is death by a thousand cuts and it's coming in so many different little directions, it's almost, I don't know if you get overwhelmed, but I get overwhelmed thinking of, there's a dragon here, but it's got 100 different heads, and I don't know which head to chop off first, frankly.
That's exactly it. I tell people I haven't always been a conspiracy theorist. 3 years ago, I was just sitting here trying to play with the cows on the farm. And I know so much right now that it scares me. I
Mhm.
mean, I'm being completely serious. And like during this ordeal, I'm a few months removed away from the U.S. Farm Credit System, who I've battled for the last 3 years trying to hire me and offering me $1.2 million if I would just sign a confidentiality statement, and I would be conflicted from ever being able to bring up the farm credit issues again. And I turned that down, obviously, because that's unethical, it's illegal, and I couldn't go to sleep at night. Okay,
Right.
and so, but within a week, I get a death threat in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. in the morning with an aerial image of my property. And they won't intimidate me. They cannot break me. They have tried every way in the world. but it shows, like, when I say that it scares me, it's amazing the webs that there are in this. And every time that I think that I've got to who, like, I think about, like, when I was a kid playing on Nintendo against the Mike Tyson's Punch Out game, and like you're facing these competitors are getting tougher and tougher. Everybody that I think is Mike Tyson coming out, that's my biggest challenge, there's somebody standing behind them.
Yeah.
And I say that with the fact that it's not just the corporations that have captured, it's not just the Tysons, it's not just the USDA who has effectively captured farm credit, it's foreign governments.
Mhm.
You look at some of these properties that have been bought up, they have been bought up around strategic military locations.
Mhm.
And you run the deeds back to them and you do the connections between the different shell companies, and you can come back to the people's government in China, and that that would scare anybody to just realize the depth of it, because like when you say that you become kind of overwhelmed in thinking of it,
Mhm.
there's not a day that I go by in trying to figure out how do you fix all this.
Mhm.
And the problem is you've got to do it piecemeal. There is no way to fix it all at once. And this farm credit case and the Save Our Farms campaign that we've been doing on X, which is, it resonates with people.
Mhm.
And it resonates beyond farmers. And I feel like that we have reached this critical juncture in history to where consumers understand what's going on.
Mhm.
And that is what has to happen, because farmers are such a small fraction of the
Right.
population. And alone, the farmers cannot do anything. I'll just tell you, they
Right.
cannot do it. And it's why within this campaign of the last 90 days, and I started from a just standing stop on X, and I started there because my account on Facebook got disabled after I sued President Biden, and
Funny how that
so
works.
it is, it really is, and they even gave me a little note, and we're not even going to tell you why we disabled it, so don't ask. But and there's no appeal. But on X in the last 90 days, we've had over 15 million views.
Mhm.
And I mean, that's amazing. That is great, because the truth is on our side. And when I say our side, I mean the small farmer side. It's they have been abused for years. They have lacked in having a voice. A lot of the associations that they felt like were their voice, they were wolves in sheep's clothing.
Mhm.
And they were going for the end result, and it really all comes down to money and control at the end of the day. But I'm not afraid to speak out against these entities, and just in telling the truth. And there are entities that at the end of the day, and I'll give as just one example is Farm Bureau. And this is nothing against Farm Bureau, but you've got 1.8 million farms left in this country.
Mhm.
Farm Bureau has over 6 million members. That tells you they're not all farmers. And Farm Bureau is an insurance company at the end of the day, and
Mhm.
they owe a duty to make profit. And I don't begrudge anybody for trying to make a profit. We have got, though, to sort out fact from fiction within the farming community as to whose motives are pure in speaking for us.
Mhm.
And we've got to sort out some of these conflicts to because there's too many farmers that have relied on these people to be voices for them, only to later find out they're lobbying completely against their interests. So
Mhm.
it is a widespread situation, and it's just like, how do you eat an elephant in just one bite at a time? And so that's what we're trying to do.
Right. Well, your experience totally mirrors what's happening up here in South Dakota because, yeah, I was offered a gig doing the social media for the pipeline during
Yeah.
all this, and then on the flip side, shortly after, I was told you're making all of the wrong people mad. So then the threats come when you won't play along, and even on the foreign ownership thing, South Dakota passed this big fancy foreign ownership ban. And yet, right in the fine print, there's an exclusion for carbon pipelines because of course that pipeline is connected back to China and Saudi Arabia, and the politicians here have all been paid off. And so when you say conspiracy theorists, it's like, yeah, people that don't aren't willing to go and dive into all these little connections in the tentacle web. They can just say that to dismiss you. And yet it seems to me the same playbook is used over and over and over again. And yeah, like you said, you don't mean to pick on the Farm Bureau, but right here in South Dakota, the Farm Bureau here passed a policy that they're fine with using eminent domain as long as 2/3 of the farmers sign on to a project. Well, what about the other 1/3 that want to build their own businesses and don't want to be forced to be part of the Green New Deal? Yet it's like mob rule here, and that's your South Dakota Farm Bureau setting that policy. So it's a scary thing to realize. Well, the reality is no one's going to fight harder for you than you. And I guess what advice would you have for somebody, because like you're brave, you're willing, you had the wherewithal to be able to withstand these threats and the pressure and all the things. But your average everyday farmer, what encouragement would you have for them to not just cave because they feel like they've already lost the battle, to stay in the battle and stand up for the right side of history here?
Yeah, they should look at the track over these last 90 days and see that we have had some small wins in this. And, here in Middle Tennessee, a couple of weeks ago, there was a situation to where 1,400 acres of farmland in Middle Tennessee was going to be converted to industrial use. And it was a company that's actually owned by Ross Perot Jr. And so I didn't organize that. I went and documented that. Those people deserve all the credit, but they went and they filled that courthouse at that zoning meeting. People that, when you get right down to it, did it impact them directly? It might not have,
Mhm.
but they could see what is coming in this and they could see the full picture of it. And so they ultimately got up and they spoke from the heart. And I would guess there were 20 people that spoke from that community, farmers and just rural residents of wanting to try to save this farmland and to save our farms. And ultimately, the zoning committee voted and said, we're leaving it agricultural use. And that is a win. And let me tell you something, if that courthouse would have been empty, they'd be starting construction right now.
Yeah,
And, and, and
absolutely.
and so don't underestimate the power of your voice. It is, I don't care who you are. I don't care if you have 10 followers on X. If you go back like 3 months ago, I think I had like 600 or something like that.
Yeah.
And so now we've got over 15,000, but your one voice can be amplified in a medium like that. And there are certainly other mediums, but I just encourage people to take a look, investigate it for yourself, because there's no way, if you look at it, when you think about the full picture, that there's going to be anybody amongst us in the United States that wouldn't ultimately be affected by this.
Right.
And you're getting a preview of it right now when you go to the grocery store and
Mhm.
you see what the prices are. Well, just think, when we get to a point of where there are no family farms, there is no other option, and a company like Tyson can charge whatever they want to for that slab of bacon.
Yep.
And, that's when all of a sudden you're going to say, man, I wish we would have done something about this.
Mhm.
And at that point, it is too late. But we still have a chance here to not only put the brakes on this, but maybe to reverse some of this. And that's what I cling to hope with myself.
Yeah. And I totally agree with that. Your voice counts. And what I've tried to focus on in this show and what I've seen for successes happening lately in South Dakota is we're reclaiming one important piece, and that is community. And when you lock arms with other people, it makes you pretty powerful. When you pack your state capitol building or the county commissioner meetings with massive amounts of people, it is really hard to deny or to ignore your voice. And so yeah, we got to work together here, and we've got to band together. And there's more of us than them at the end of the day. They might have all the money and all the powerful positions, but we have the people, and that's what makes it awesome. Okay, so I knew this would go fast. I knew there would be so much I wanted to talk to you about. But let's talk about what happened here recently with the Supreme Court and the Chevron case. So bring us up to speed on that, and maybe this will kind of play into things being better for us in our favor moving forward.
I think so, and this is why I say that things can't get any worse. Okay,
Right.
so all we've done is we've shook things up here, and we'll see where they land. And this is a monumental ruling. I mean, this has the potential of being a top 10 Supreme Court ruling of all time. They will study this case in law schools. They will study this case in history. And the case is Loper. It goes back, and what it did was reverse the Chevron doctrine. And I'll just give kind of a glimpse of the Chevron doctrine first. The way things had been would be if I, as a private citizen, have had my rights violated by, let's just say, the U.S. Farm Credit Administration, as hard as that might be for people to believe. And all of a sudden, I look at the statute and I say, no, wait a second, Farm Credit Administration, you were supposed to, by these statutes, step in here when you knew that somebody was extorting one of your borrowers.
Right.
And the thing is, Chevron allowed federal agencies to basically say, no, that's not the way we interpret it. And they were given deference. And you look at case after case after case, Chevron's been cited 18,000 times in judicial history. And what it had become was a crutch for the courts, really. The courts could say, well, we don't want to have to make a decision here. We just defer to whatever the agency said. And whether that was the EPA or whether it's the USDA or whether it's the FDA, then they were getting essentially full discretion to rewrite laws. I mean, there's just really no other way to put it. And I hear people who say, do we really want to give that power to the courts? And listen, I'll be the first to tell you, I don't have any kind of sunshine to put out there about our court system. It's been captured to a great extent as well. Here's the thing, though. What this Loper opinion does is it just allows the court to call balls and strikes. Yeah. We're going to make a determination, and we're going to allow that private citizen. Now, we got to keep in mind it would also allow corporations that might come and challenge different things like an EPA regulation.
Sure.
But all they have done here is just said, we are wiping the slate clean. And when it's brought to us, we won't shift our duty away to that federal agency who is unelected. Right. And that's the key here is we have created this fourth realm of an administrative state. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the people that you hear that are against the Chevron case are people that maybe that administrative state might be working in their favor.
Right.
But the family farms, there is no question when you look at the USDA, when you look at farm credit. I mean, farm credit, you go back to the 1980s and people literally marched on Washington and got them because they were foreclosing on farms and the farmers didn't have a way to sue the Farm Credit Administration.
Right.
They bargained, they got a private right of action, and then 2 years later, Farm Credit essentially said they interpreted it that the borrowers shouldn't have a private right of action to sue them. Well, imagine that. Yep. And they got a court to agree with it. And again, when you look at that timing, Chevron came out in the 80s. Mm-hmm. All of that is part and parcel to we should not. Yes, I am concerned about judicial activism. Yes, I am concerned that there will be cases where corporations bring things forward that might be detrimental on certain regulations because of the influence and sway they might have in the court system. But beyond that, the little man, the farmer has a chance right now. Like if I didn't have anything else to do, I could file 1,000 cases tomorrow on USDA regulations to where they have overstepped their bounds.
Totally.
And listen, there are people in that USDA, there are people in the EPA, there are people in farm credit who are sitting at their desk right now shaking. And I'm being serious because they have had this protection through Chevron for all these years that if we say it, it is. I mean, and because if when you think of like judicial deference, the last thing a judge ever wants to do is to have to do anything. And so as long as they can shift that and say, well, Chevron says we got to go with them. And there's plenty of cases through the years with USDA and otherwise to where courts disagreed with what the USDA's interpretation was, but they were bound by Chevron. And they had to give them that deference that they were the experts in the field. And the last point on that being this, there are a lot of people out there that are saying, like, well, these are the experts. Why are we not letting the experts? No, they're not. They're not experts. When you get right down to who is making these decisions, it is the corporations, to a great extent. It
Mhm.
is the corporations, and there is no think tank or brain trust that's sitting up in Washington D.C. that knows everything about these policies.
Right.
And that's where I come back to, let's just get crazy. Let's get rid of Chevron, and let's at least see what the court does with it. And it gives this is the biggest impact it will have. It will make that government official think twice before they violate an individual's rights.
Absolutely. And if we look at like DC as a town itself, it is extremely liberal city with those folks working in those agencies are very likely extremely liberal as well. It's why we've seen the weaponization of like the WOTUS ruling, where I'd be interviewing little old ladies that are crying because you've got somebody from USDA or EPA picking on them because of a mud puddle in their front yard, or weaponizing the Endangered Species Act. And oh, we found one toad, and now we're going to totally just destroy your ability to run cattle on this land. It's checking the government a little bit, rolling it back, not putting so much power into the hands of basically bureaucrats that have 40-year careers and a pension waiting for them, and it puts it rightly back with the people who are responsible for making the laws and making sure the laws are enforced. And so I guess a question for you I would have is, as we're looking down to the fall, cattle ranchers are facing mandatory EID.
Yeah,
Is this going to help us out to
I
push back
think
against this?
so. I think so. And if you look back, and there's been some legislation that's been introduced, I think by Harriet, and I probably will mispronounce her last name, but like Harriet Hageman and then
Oh, yep.
Thomas Massey, and to try to put the brakes on this. And one of the things, if you look at Thomas Massey's quotes, that he says is this isn't based on a law. These are based on interpretations. And so, and if you look at their interpretations, they're talking about disease traceability and things like that. No, go if you want to see what the next 30 minutes of that movie is, look over at Europe right now and
Right.
look at where they are attempting to implement these carbon taxes. And here's the thing. If you look back 10 years ago, there were some workplaces that were implementing RFID technology to track workers. They still are. And you think about that, and there is always some ulterior motive, okay? And when you think about the fact we have had animal ID systems that have been perfectly fine since the beginning of time. It is not a disease traceability deal. It is ultimately so the government can know exactly what your inventory is at all times. And listen, at the point that they can do that, you are completely at their mercy. Because what if they pass a rule that says, if you want to keep farming, you've got to pay $2,500 a cow?
Hmm.
I'd just sell all my cows. I wouldn't have any choice.
Hmm.
JBS, those companies, they might pay it. That's okay. If that's the cost of paying it to eliminate all of their competition, then so be it. And that's an extreme example, but it's not that extreme. And ultimately, that's what it is. You look at our history over the years, and listen, this Summit Carbon Pipeline deal, we ain't got time to go through all of it, but if you go back to 2002, the eventual USDA undersecretary, who was from South Dakota, partners with a private businessman from South Dakota. He goes into the USDA. They put all this money into this carbon capture deal. The guy is a private business owner with the person that basically invents and markets that technology.
Hmm.
And so we have finally reached the point in history to where information can sometimes travel more quickly than corruption.
Yeah.
And I think corruption, that's the balance I always weigh in my head. Like, have we always been this corrupt? Like throughout history, have
Right.
things always been this corrupt? Yeah, I think so. I think so. We just now, all of a sudden, we can gather that information more quickly. That by the time they've paid off somebody, somebody might have saw it and posted on X. And
Right.
and And so this is a great time. I mean, it really is. It's a great time in history. And I call these people out by name when I know that they've done something wrong, because it doesn't mean anything for me to say the Farm Credit Administration did wrong. They will hide behind their desk and you'll never know. But
Mhm.
when I say the Inspector General, Wendy LaGuardia, has sabotaged the United States farm credit system, she'll go home and she'll hear that tonight. And
There-
I want these people to hear it, because they have betrayed the farmers, they've betrayed the American public, and we've got to start calling these people out. When you've got foreign governments coming in buying land up around military sites, it's time to dust off the horn book on treason, and
Yeah.
let's take a look at that, because what else could it be? And I don't care if your motivation is profit versus national security issues. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, these decisions are jeopardizing ordinary people like me and you.
Mhm.
And to circle it all the way back, Chevron might give us that foot in the door that we need to be able to bring back some common sense to all of this.
Well, you might be just building a case for the American cattle rancher, because I think maybe we could sue Joe Biden, because they're talking about we need this EID for animal disease traceability and mitigation of risk. And I would argue, well, the American government has failed to secure our borders, and they're bringing in cattle from countries with foot and mouth disease. And so, why are you placing the buck on the American cattle rancher when you're the one that's failing to do your job? And shame on the NCBA. I mean, there's great people in the NCBA, but shame on anyone in the NCBA that's advocating for this to happen. How dare you ask your neighbor to put a tag in their cattle, which is it's going to be costly, labor intensive. It's going to result in retirement of many producers. It's going to create a police state out of every livestock auction barn in the country. And it's just the tip of the iceberg of these tags will be weaponized against us in the near future, because it's a way to collect data and it's a way to show our inventory and all of those things. So yeah, I think that's coming down the pike, but I'm hopeful with this Chevron deal. Maybe we'll be able to push back a little bit harder than we once could have, perhaps.
Absolutely, and you're on the right track in that. I think that this is going to create lawsuits across the board, and there needs to be on behalf of the farmers, because our backs are up against the wall.
They are.
We ain't got another 25 years to sit around and wait. And so it's encouraging, as discouraging as it is to know all this, it's encouraging to see like people like you that are out fighting this fight, and to see just the momentum that we have on a platform like X by doing nothing more than just having your free speech out there.
Telling the truth,
That's
right.
right.
Absolutely. Well, Dustin, you give me a lot of hope, actually. Like you said, it's hard to know the truth, but once you know the truth, it's really hard to suppress that truth. And all we have to do on our side is to set it free and let the truth do its thing. So, Dustin, I guess any parting words, and can you tell folks where they can follow you for
Yeah.
more information of what you do?
Yeah, so on X, I'm just at Dustin Kittle. We have a Save Our Farms campaign that we're working on. You can find more information in my profile on that. You can read the actual lawsuit we filed against President Biden, which is, I think it's over 100 pages now. We've amended it once. We will be amending it again. And I just encourage everybody to stay informed on these issues, whether you're a farmer, a rancher, or just someone that likes to eat.
Yeah.
Because I'm all of those things. These things are important, and they will mean something to you, or they will mean something to your kids at some point. And you owe it to them, you owe it to yourself to be informed on these issues and to use your voice to help.
Absolutely. Well, I can't think of a better way to end the show. I appreciate all your time, and I hope we can meet on the Dusty Trail very soon, Dustin.
Thank you, Amanda.